we go from Western North Dakota. The men and women in blue are coming at you straight off the cuff. Good morning, Chief Dossinger.
Good morning, Kylan. How are you?
I'm doing well.
You know, I'm excited this morning. We have a very, very special guest in our studio.
I completely agree with you. I was thinking beforehand here, we should have had Lieutenant Hannell do some mad mixing for us, and I thought a combination of like, guess who's back again, with like that major league scene where the pitcher comes out and they're playing Wild Thing. Somehow get those two put together and see how that would sound here. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, you look at in the room today, for anybody who's paying attention, we have history books, we have history buffs in the room, and it's going to be pretty exciting, I think, to dive into our former chief and pair that up with you, Chief Dossinger, and how things have transpired over the course of, we're looking at 40 years. 40 plus years. And for the listeners in Dickinson, hopefully they hear that right away. And that's what you're going to get out of this. That's what we're looking to provide you.
Yeah, I'm excited. And I want to, especially thank Chief Rummel for coming today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's such an honor.
I know it's tough to drag you back over to Western North Dakota from the hills. But thank you for coming over today.
You're welcome. I appreciate you just asking. So.
Maybe before we tee him up, Chief, I know that it has been a hellacious busy time in the city and for you and what's going around, and maybe we can give an update to the citizens a little bit on what you've been seeing from your seat and for the department and such.
Certainly, department-wise, August, kind of the tail end of the summer. Call-wise, we responded to 2,394 calls for service month of August. Kind of very typical, I guess, from what we see towards the end of summer. But one statistic that I'm really impressed on is that our crash numbers continually go down. Last month, in the month of August,
yes,
we only seen 53 crashes in the city of Dickinson. And for a summer month where there's a lot of motorcycle traffic, pedestrian traffic, bicycle traffic, that's a really good statistic. And I want to credit our patrol division for their proactive enforcement and getting out there and making sure that we have a safe place for people to live, work, and play every day.
Yeah, I think perspective too. I mean, traffic safety has always kind of been one of your things from the beginning of your careers. I remember it as you as my supervisor early on, and so familiar with that. Obviously, you are well.
And we try to do a number of things. We have a lot of speedboard trailers out there, to make sure that people are aware of the speed that they're traveling. Stationary patrol. We just try to be seen and really kind of prevent a lot of people from some not very good driving behavior.
Yeah, 9/11 again. We've hammered on this the last couple episodes, and today we're going to get some pre-9/11 perspective, post-9/11 perspective. But you say traffic sign and 9/11. For our listeners, you see our traffic sign floating around the community. We have a fun message for a few days.
We do. I think it's very important that people remember 9/11, so that doesn't. But there's a lot of people that are living right now in our community that don't know about 9/11, never lived through it. And it's so there's a special message out there on a speedboard trailer somewhere in the city of Dickinson for the next couple of days that are just reminding people to never forget 9/11.
Yeah, I think it's important. I saw a picture of it this morning, and I think our community will hopefully quickly understand when they see it, and should probably bring back some memories, and if not bring back memories, bring attention to. And I think that's what you're hoping for, right, Chief?
Certainly, I think everybody remembers where they were when that went down. And Chief Rummel, do you remember where you were, what you were doing?
Absolutely. It's something you don't forget. I was at home actually getting ready for work, and my mom called on the phone and said, "Do you have your TV on? Do you know what's going on?" And I went, "No, I'm getting ready for work." And so I turned on the TV, and I couldn't get ready anymore. I just kept watching, and when the second plane hit, I told her, I said, "We're under attack." And she said, "Really?" And I said, "Oh, no, we're under attack." And so, yeah, I remember right where I was. I was at home.
Yeah. What were some of the things, being chief at that point in time that, being part of the city leadership structure and stuff, what were some of the discussions held at the leadership level after that as far as making sure that our community was safe and some of the preventive measures taken?
At that time, what we were doing is just being aware. I mean, once this thing went down, there was an awareness that never really stopped after that. And we discussed it, and we thought, in our area, we're going to be pretty safe because we're a small community, and they want the big stuff. They want to make a splash in the news. And so all we wanted to do is be aware. That was the big theme.
Okay.
We got any numbers or anything, Chief, for this episode from any of our listeners, activity and such?
I just kind of briefly touched on that. One thing that we continually see an increase is our mental health related calls. And over this past weekend, our police department and medical teams responded to several suicidal threats, and that's still an alarming number. We're trying to come up with various ways of working with the different partnerships within our community and trying to help that. But I think that's one of the side effects of COVID. We've always dealt with a lot of mental health related calls, but I think COVID has definitely impacted that as well, and that's something that's not often talked about.
Yeah. I know our school zone contacts obviously are a big part of what we're doing right now with school being up on us in the beginning of that. And that's back full activity versus the halftime last year. We're certainly seeing, the changes in that with the growth in the community. It seems like the flow of traffic around the schools and calls in. We talked about it the last episode, but being a new dad in one of the elementary schools, you show up in the morning and which just pairing that up with some of the traffic safety stuff and accidents you talked about at the beginning.
Yeah, certainly, there's definitely the traffic pattern changes when school starts. Along by the middle school, some elementary schools, we just encourage everybody to always take more time getting from point A to point B. There's a lot more traffic, a lot more pedestrian traffic, and keep an eye out for that child that's maybe not paying attention, that could possibly step off the sidewalk, or maybe for that parent that's not having a really good day and they're late for work and are rushing. So it's just very important that everybody's really proactive and being aware when they're dropping their kids off at school and driving in those areas every morning. For the month of August, like I touched on, our crash numbers are low, but we never want to see injury accidents. We did have 2 injury accidents last month. So that's something that'd be always nice to see a big goose egg up every month. Yeah,
I saw we had one last night, even just down in the trailer park. It looked like on an injury, maybe on a vehicle that got turned on its side or something as such. So inside city limits, some people think low speed and low risk sort of thing, but obviously, that's different.
Over the years, we've seen a lot of rollovers, some serious crashes. We've unfortunately seen a lot of fatalities. We just encourage you, just because you're driving in city limits doesn't mean it can't happen.
Yeah. Well, I'm ready for story time. And I said history books and history buffs in the room. Maybe it would be most fitting to, for former Chief Rummel here, as he was in investigations for a long time. Maybe reading Miranda would be appropriate for the right to remain silent, and anything you say will be held against you. Yeah,
and it's recorded too.
Yeah. So, with that, but the Rummel name, it's been here forever. It's been here forever, and it's deeply ingrained in the community throughout your family and your guys' impact over the last 80 years, such with your pops who just recently passed, and our thoughts are with your family on that one. There is,
thank you,
as a great man who was always supportive of us and such.
Yep.
So, a lot of the listeners are going to know, Chuck, but for those that don't, what would you say to them?
A little bit about myself?
Yes.
Okay. Well, of course, I was born and raised here. And so I'm a local boy, and went to high school here, and worked for my dad until I joined the police department. And I started off as a reserve officer now, what they would call, I don't know if you still have that program, but it was called auxiliary back then. Yeah, auxiliary police. I started with that. And I remember, the reason I got into police work is kind of this is why you read me my rights. Anyway, I'm traveling to work one noon hour from home back to the shop, back to Rummel's Auto Wrecking, and I'm going down Villard, and I'm doing about 50 miles an hour because I'm late.
What are you driving?
I'm driving a little Maverick, believe it or not, a little Maverick. And Clarence Toohey was on patrol, and he's about a block away talking to a guy alongside the street, alongside me, sees me fly by. So he stops me, and right in front of the shop. And so I get out of the car, and he waves me back to his car, and I have a front seat, and we start talking. And he said, "You're going pretty fast there," and he's, kind of chewing me out, and he's getting his ticket book out, and I went, "Well, the Captain Henry Weber wants me to join the police department." And he said, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah, as a reserve or auxiliary." He said, "Well," so he gets on the mic. He gets on the radio, and he asks dispatch, is Captain Weber in? And they, believe it or not, he's standing right there. And so Clarence says, I've got a young man here that wants to join the auxiliary. He said, you've been trying to recruit him. And so he told him my name, and he said, yeah, have him come in tonight, and we're just having a meeting. We're having an auxiliary meeting tonight. So I thought, okay, well, I got him off track, so he didn't write me a ticket. But I always say I got myself on a ticket, but into a life sentence.
What kind of squad car were they?
Oh, I think it was a Crown Vic. I think it was yeah. They were a lot different than they are today, I'll tell you.
I've heard a story in the past. You talked about having to rig up the brake pedal or such with the short legs to be able to make something.
That's all false.
Yeah, to be able to even reach the pedals.
Oh, they couldn't hardly see me over the steering wheel, and so because the seats were broken down. You know, we got some heavy cops back then, and I'd get in the car and I'd be down like I'd have to look through the steering wheel.
Because how old are you at this time, and about how big are you at that time?
Oh, well, I was about 6 foot. No, I'm never big. Anyway, I was about 5'4". I was 5'4", and I was about 26 maybe.
Yeah. How much did you weigh? You remember?
About 140.
Yeah. So.
Oh yeah. You know, and when they actually hired me and I was going through the process, that's one of the things that was unheard of. Little guys like I were not chosen to be a cop.
Sure.
Mikey would know about that.
Yeah.
But
right. The what was that process like, getting hired for the PD back, and what year was that?
1978. 1978, I got hired. So I spent about 1.5 years on the auxiliary before I got hired full time. But I spent a lot of time volunteering. And it got to the point where the guys on the force trusted me, and so if they needed some extra help or somebody called in sick, guess what? They called me, and I got to work. And so the more I got to work, the more I loved it. And so the hiring process, I tried one time and I didn't get it. Tried again, didn't get it. It was a test, a written test, and an interview with the chief and the commissioner at that time, and that was it.
Who was the commissioner?
Can't think. It was Chief Gerald Barnhart, and he was at the college. He was a professor at the college, also
Okay.
a commissioner. Can't think of his name right now.
Okay.
So that's what it took. Yeah, and I had 2 previous interviews, and at that time I would look as good as I would wear the tie and all that. The last time I thought, I've got nothing to lose. I hadn't gotten a haircut. My hair was shoulder length, and I came in there with just a pullover T-shirt. But I said all the right things or something, because they hired me, and on condition I get a haircut. So that was the condition, and the rest is history. It's just
what's the makeup of Dickinson at this time in law enforcement, populace-wise, and
it's around 12,000. Maybe a little bit more. It was just getting into the oil boom. It was just the beginnings of the oil boom, so it grew real quick after that. And in fact, that's why they hired 2 new officers, is because they had to grow the police department.
Remember how many about total at that time working, sworn?
There were 4 shifts, and probably 4 on each shift.
Okay.
Yeah, two officers, a sergeant, and a lieutenant.
And who was on your first crew? Your first assigned crew?
It was called D shift. We have A, B, C, and D shift, and we were called D shift. Kind of, they made fun of us, said that you're the dumb shift, but we solved the most crimes. And it was Bob Nass, Pat Lynch, Jackie Martin. And then it grew to be Bill Leach and I. So we were after a couple of years, that's how it got to be. And back then, you stayed on the same shift. Year after year, you stayed on the same shift, which was nice, which was really nice. And the only time you leave is when you got promoted.
And what were your guys' hours, your shifts like?
It was 8 hours. It was 7 to 3, 3 to 11, and then of course 11 to 7.
With 4 shifts, I mean, there's a lot of work happening. I mean, there's a lot.
Yeah. And, you know, during that time, there were many times when people took off. I remember graveyard shifts on weekends where there'd just be two of us. And we would be answering bar fights and disturbances of all kinds, just two of us. So many times we went on calls all alone because the other one was busy with a traffic stop or DUI. There were quite a few nights that just Dave Wallace and I worked together.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we did. And he kept me busy.
Yeah, I bet. Did the same sort of thing that exists now exist then with county guys or these outlying agencies come if you needed help?
Oh, we had to. We had to back then, and it wasn't uncommon for the highway patrol or the sheriff's deputies to roll in and help us. It was a really good working relationship among the troops.
What about the feel? I mean, the relationship with the department at that time, with the community, you know, in hindsight now, looking back on it, how do you feel about it, or you look at that? What do you think?
It was positive for us. They felt, you know, they were legitimately scared because a lot of bad people were coming in to work the oil fields.
And about what year is that? You say you start 78?
It was 78 through 82 probably, and that's when it declined. If I remember correctly, that's when it started. The oil field just dropped, and when it dropped, everybody just left. It was amazing how quickly it came and how quickly it left. Sure. You could buy houses back then for little or nothing, and they were for sale all over the place.
How long after you started did your butt cheeks finally let loose and your white knuckles go away? You think?
Actually, I never really had that, because by this time I had already enough experience when I was hired full time that I had seen a lot of stuff. I had been to all kinds of domestics and bar fights, but you know, that was pretty much the extent of Dickinson back then. There might have been an occasional gunfire, you know, but what they were shooting at was street lights. You know, they were shooting the street lights out on Main Street. They drive by and shoot at them, you know, but we didn't have any, murders or we had threats sometimes, but that's about it.
What were you wearing for equipment?
I was, what were we wearing? We had, I had a revolver. I had a Colt 357 revolver. I had a holster that had just a strap over it. Of course, we had handcuffs, and of course, I bought the revolver. So you had to buy your own gun back then, and so bought the revolver, and it was a strap over, and then handcuffs and a nightstick and a flashlight.
How about with your guys' ballistics with vests? Having them, wearing them, not wearing them?
Didn't have them. It was only when a friend of mine and I went into a private business together. This was probably early 80s as well. I don't remember the year. His name was Dean Williams, and he was an auxiliary officer as well. So he went into business selling police equipment, and we purchased our first vest through him with the help of the Eagles Club. They gave us the money to purchase vests, and those were Second Chance, which was, this is the guy who owned Second Chance vests. He would go around the country demonstrating by shooting himself, which didn't make any sense to me, but
good marketing scheme.
Yeah, look at, I survived.
Right.
How many? And he would shoot himself quite often. It was crazy.
So, you think about that, Chief Dossinger, now when we just evolved into some body cameras and stuff. Does anything come to mind? You hear some of that stuff?
Well, just, the technology of just talking about the squad cars alone. When I started, we never had in-car video cameras. You had plenty of room in what I'll call the cockpit area. Now I get into those cars, there's so much equipment stuck in them between the in-car video cameras, the mobile data terminals. It's really like you're in a jet plane.
Yeah,
and
automation.
There's just so many dollars that are stuck in just the pure technology of the squad cars moving down the streets that it's amazing how law enforcement has just evolved over the years, and everything's I'll just get scientific, in a sense. Everything that we do is just continually evolving. And even 3 years ago, the technology has changed so much for our department, just in the squad car aspect of it. But you talk about the equipment that the average duty officer on the street is carrying with them right now. The portable radios, how expensive they are, the body cameras. There's just so much technology that the average officer is carrying on them right now. It's amazing.
Yeah, our external vests, obviously you see, a lot of the law enforcement officers now. We don't have this, but there's some technology out there. They're trying to make a push in, and we'll see if it sticks or not. A lot of mixed reviews on it, but it's called a BOLA wrap. And it is essentially, you think of how the taser works, right?
Yeah.
With the expulsion of the probes and stuff. But on this BOLA wrap, it shoots out a net, a string, a rope, and then it wraps and it ties around itself and essentially kind of harnesses like a modern day cowboy, out of it. And it's like, you got to check it out when you leave here. BOLA wrap for any of the listeners. I want you to go look at that. But it's there's some agencies that have had it. We don't have it here, but
Yeah.
I heard one time you're pretty good with the PR-24.
I went through quite a training process. I became an instructor in it because after an incident where I got my butt kicked, to be honest with you, I said that'll never happen again. And the PR-24 was a new concept. For those that don't know what that is, it's a side-handled baton. And so, again, Dean Williams and I traveled over to Mandan, who had a certified instructor over there. And to become an instructor, we had to go through an 8-hour course with him. And, it's at that time, it was a really good tool. But I remember we went in the morning. We started at 8 o'clock in the morning. At noon, we went to eat lunch. Neither of us could even pick up a fork because our wrists were so sore and swollen. And then we had to go back for more. And this guy was merciless. He said, "You need to feel what this." I went, wow, I'm not the bad guy here, but what I could do with it was amazing because there were several instances where I used it and successfully,
And we're doing our best right now to try to get our young officers prepared for what you just lead that story with that story. Can you tell, what was that change for you? I need to go get some more training. I need to be more prepared. Can you talk about the story itself? What happened?
Sure. Yeah, it kind of hit the front page of the Dickinson Press for a little bit because I was responsible for breaking 50-some water glasses or something like that. We answered a call. My partner and I, or one of the guys on the shift, and I answered this call at the Ivanhoe Inn, which was was downtown, and at that time it had an all-night restaurant. And the call was for a guy that was lighting sugar packs on fire at the table. A waitress went over there to tell him he had to stop, and he grabbed her by the back of the hair and put her neck out and threw her on the ground. And so there were a few patrons in there, and we got called. And so this officer and I responded, and we asked for ID. And we took his cigarette lighter away because he was lighting sugar packets as we were getting in there. And so we asked for ID, and he flipped his ID out and put it back in his pocket. And we didn't even get to see it. And I said, "Come on, we need to see your ID." And he said, "I'm going to kill you." And he jumped up out of his chair and grabbed me. And I went, "Whoa," and my partner was shaking, said, hey, settle down, and as he's fighting with me, he's throwing me around like a rag doll. Actually, one time he picked me up and I had ducked, or he swung at me and I ducked, and he picked me up, so I was upside down. And here's the bad part of the whole story is my holster, remember with the strap over it? Yeah. Well, the strap came loose. Sure. And the pistol fell out. A waitress saw that the pistol fell out, picked it up, ran out the back door with it to the police department, which was downtown where the old fire department was, took my pistol and laid it on the counter of dispatch. And I went, I have no gun now. And backup was on the way and all that. But by that time, this guy had beat me pretty good.
First thing where's the partner?
Well, the partner was not exactly very supportive. I'll be honest. He was going, and later investigators would talk to the witnesses, and they said, "We just felt so sorry for that little guy." He was just tossed around. And this guy, and I found out, and honestly, this guy was mentally ill, and he was off his meds. And so I got the privilege of taking him to Jamestown the next day, and had him committed. And he got out, and there were no charges. So it was kind of interesting. But, he really was strong. When he was in jail, we had iron grates over the cell, the windows in the cell block. We only had one cell block downtown. And we had an iron grate, and there were leg bolts in each corner. That man was able to take out 2 of the leg bolts out of cement with his bare hands.
Really?
Yeah. And some of the things we run into the next morning when we were transporting him, he was standing naked in the only toilet that there was, and taking a bath in the toilet. So, this is legit,
So, you think back, was there any point in there where you thought to yourself, like, this SOB is going to kill me for real?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. There was a time when he was starting to choke me out, and I went, oh, this is it. And I said, after the whole thing, I said, that will never happen to me again. Sure. And so I went and I became a trainer for the department in not only the PR-24, but for the Attorney General's office in North Dakota and for the Dickinson PD.
Yeah. How old were you at that time, and how far in your career?
That was early in my career. I was probably 31, so about 4 years into my career or something like that. Yeah.
So the PR-24, it kind of got phased out in law enforcement because of the Rodney King incident,
yes.
The image. There was some time where, when I first started, we didn't have the expandable baton. We didn't have the PR-24 stick. We basically had at that time, it was a Beretta. Beretta handgun is when I started.
Did you?
With the department, was with the Beretta semi-automatic. But basically, it was the handcuffs and an OC spray, pepper spray. So that the tools were kind of limited back then.
And your first year, Chief, for everybody that was listening?
Yeah, my first year with the Dickinson PD was in 1999. So just, on roughly, 21, 22 years, how it's changed so much.
And at that time, was there vests when you got hired assigned to you, or did you buy your own? Or
there were vests that assigned to us at that point in time.
Was it policy or just your choice?
Everybody wore them, but there was no policy in place, but everybody pretty much wore them. Only times that guys didn't wear them in heat of the summer, day shift, a lot of times the guys wouldn't wear them. Obviously, the vests didn't have the technology or the cooling capabilities that they have now, and they were hot, and they were bulky and miserable.
Yeah, and now, in uniform, they're wearing them. Everybody wears them. Policy, we provide those to our officers, and just as a complete progression, over time.
Chief Rummel, you kind of talked about, you blasted some names out there, Jackie Martin,
yes,
Clarence Toohey, some of those, that they kind of leave a legacy behind. A lot of those names are still talked about within the halls, but there's more and more people that we have in our department that don't know about these individuals or the legacy. But I do, Lieutenant Hannell does, Lieutenant Klauser does. But what are some fond memories of some of those people that you worked with that kind of sticks out?
Oh boy. Well, with Jackie and I had, she was on our shift. When she got hired, she got assigned to our shift, and she was the first female. And so,
do you remember about what year that was?
It was right after me. She was the next one hired. In fact, she had run against me when I got hired. So she was the next one hired. And so that was probably about a year later. Gotcha. So about 79, something like that. And I'll remember, we were rough and tough back. We had to be back then because the crowd was rough and tough. And so we, as a shift, were talking and saying, I don't know if she can, do the mustard here. Can she handle herself and all that? So every chance I got, I would kind of attack her in the hallway, and she would just be so angry sometimes. But she could handle it. She was a great cop. She moved on to be an investigator, and she was a really good investigator. She solved a lot of crimes. In fact, she would be the one I would, out of all the investigative team at that time, I would go to her and say, hey, we can solve this, and she had the get-go to do it and the smarts. So I really appreciated her.
And Jackie, Sergeant Martin, I refer to her as, because
Yep.
she was my sergeant for a while on the street. She started out as a meter maid downtown, is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, that's what she started out with. You know, we all kind of started out, you know, on the walking beat, and you mentioned the portable radios. I remember walking when it was so cold. You know, when I first started, I didn't get in the squad car. I had to walk the streets, and the portable radios at that time must have weighed a ton because my pants kept falling down. You know, I had to wear 4 belt keepers to keep my pants up.
You think about the meter officer end of it, and you think now we're 25, almost 26,000. And for anybody who's out there listening, our parking or people with issues with parking, we do not have that right now. So that was back in the late 70s when there was at 12,000. So hey, just like geez.
Yeah. Every weekend, officers were assigned to go milk the meters, so to speak. And so we took this. It was just a galvanized bucket. And we go from meter to, 2 of us would go from meter to meter and clean them out. And that took a long time too, but we walked around with all these coins in our bucket.
Were they primarily set up like, you know, downtown, kind of where the Woolworths department store was? Or
Throughout the whole downtown. And the parking lots, and all the parking lots. So yeah, throughout all downtown was parking meters.
And our city center, of course, was a little bit different at that time as being the focal point for much where we've expanded now. But
yes, it sure was.
Can you maybe take a second and talk about your progression of your career, you know, from the beginning, we taught patrol, and as it went all the way through till the end?
Oh boy. Like I said, when I started, I remember the first day, it was the 1st of July I started, so it was during the Rough Rider thing. And so I'm dressed and I'm pumped and I'm ready to go and I'm all excited. And the animal warden picked me up and I went, oh, this isn't going to be good. You know, I'm going to be chasing dogs all day or something. But I was assigned to, at that time, I was assigned to walking downtown. And and for the first part of my career, it was walking. And then when I got into a car, you know, I was about 2 years into my career, I was assigned to investigations. I stayed there for about 6 months, and it wasn't me. It wasn't for me at that time. And so I asked the chief to be transferred back on patrol. I got that request honored, and so I went back on patrol. And under Chief Webb, I was promoted to sergeant on patrol. And when Chief Bazzano showed up, I was assigned back to investigations and stayed there, you know, for the rest of my career until I became chief. So, you know, when he assigned me to investigations, he and I had worked together because he was a BCI agent at that time before he became chief. And so we had worked some drug cases together and other cases. So he saw something in me I didn't see. So when he assigned me to investigations, he said, the one thing I would like you to do is prioritize and focus on the double homicide from the Swanson Motel, which I did, and that case, you know, was successful. But I loved investigations. I became a lieutenant in investigations. Chief Wolf moved me back out for 1 year. He thought to round me out professionally, I needed to spend some time in charge of a patrol, you know, a patrol shift. And I appreciated that at that time. I mean, at that time I didn't, but I went, you know, this does make sense. And then after a year, they moved Lieutenant Haig out and moved me in charge of investigations then.
I know we went back and forth a little bit about who was going to be the longest tenured person in investigations as it went back, but you spent total time in investigations?
I was in charge of it for 15, so about 16, 17 years, I think.
Quite a long time.
Yeah.
You know, I can't let you get away because you just planted the seed with it, you know, when we're getting into highlights of the Swanson murders and such. And, you know, Lieutenant Hannell beforehand, he had done a little bit of pre-event planning here and had found another podcast. And then independently, you had talked about finding a podcast that talked about the Swanson murders that were unsolved for a great amount of time before you were able to. So maybe But for the people listening, I think they're going to love to hear this. Can we go through the beginning of that and tell us about, from the beginning when the incident occurred, and we'll pick it apart as it goes. But I'm excited to hear this. So.
Okay. Well, as I said, I was in investigations just prior to the Swanson Motel murders. Chief Gary Banyai at that time was on patrol on the morning that it happened. He picked me up, and I really believe it was a Sunday night, and it was a Monday morning when we got picked up, and after I'd taken him home, I had just got into the police department, and we get this call, and dispatch said, "There's a lady. We just received a call. A gentleman was at the Swanson Motel. There's a lady tied up on the floor, and he thought she was dead." Of course, we go racing over there, and so I didn't go in. I was on the outside. I was the rookie, so I stayed out. I was the young one, so I stayed out and protected the crime scene from the outside. Officers went in, determined that she was dead, and we called investigators. And at that time, it was Jim Rice was the investigator. Now, we hadn't experienced it for the city, and especially the police department, hadn't dealt with a homicide before. And so I was just saying to myself, I am so thankful I'm not in investigations, because I wouldn't know where to begin with this thing. And with that, troops were called in, and the coroner was called in. Little bit later, as the investigation progressed, within about a half hour, a car screams up to it, just in time for school to start. And out this woman comes racing out of the car, and I had to hold her back. I remember that, and she was my baby, and nobody could figure out what the heck she was talking about. At that time, one of the investigators went back into the back bedroom, lifted the covers off the bed, and found Danielle Leeds, the 7-year-old girl. So we didn't know she was back there. We knew the grandma, and we were focusing on grandma, on Priscilla. And so they found out that she was also killed.
Where are these motels located at that time, for the listeners watching?
Swanson Motel is on the corner of Villard, and 8th Avenue West. Okay. I think it's Honda dealer right across the street now.
That's about.
Okay, so it's a vacant lot right now. Okay. They tore it down. And the Swanson Motel was it had apartments for oil workers. The house across the street was also rented out. So there were a lot of people that stayed there for months at a time.
You guys were familiar with it?
Oh, we're familiar with it, yeah. So, so the investigation continued. We had a lot of leads. Investigators were looking for suspects, and just nothing was panning out. We were chasing down a person that was walking down 22, and nobody knew him, and it was in the middle of the night, and so they were chasing that lead down. They finally caught up to him somewhere in South Dakota, I believe it was. So he didn't turn out. So where do you go from here? And so the Crime Bureau was called in to assist, and Norbert Sickler was assigned here. And so it was him and Jim Rice that kind of led the investigation. I remember a little bit later, about 2 hours later, 3 hours later, other BCI agents from Minot showed up. And
this was on the day of the incident?
Mm-hmm. And they showed up on the scene. And later, after it was solved, and we found out who it was, one of those investigators, one of those BCI agents said, I was staring at him. He was watching from across the street. And I thought to myself, that's a suspect right there. But he never said anything. So, but
what's our manner of death on our victims?
Okay. Priscilla, the grandma, was on the living room floor. She had on a blue, what was later called a muumuu.
Okay.
A muumuu. She was tied up hog style. She was laying on her stomach, and so she had the rope wrapped around her neck. She had her hands tied behind her and her legs tied up. So they're all tied behind her. and if she struggled, she would strangle herself.
It seemed pretty sophisticated.
It did. That's what we thought right away. And so that was that case. Now, Danielle was wearing a strawberry shortcake nightgown, and she had a mark on her cheek that everybody thought was a bite mark, because it kind of looked like a bite mark. But it actually was him hitting her with a stick. Now, there was a table that folded down, and when the leaves were up, these sticks would hold those leaves up. And he got a hold of them, and after he had tied up Priscilla, the grandma, the little girl comes out and said, "What are you doing to Grandma?" And he says to her, "Don't worry about it, go back to bed." And as he's escorting her back to bed, he picks up that stick and he smacks her. He hits her in the head.
And we're going to come back around. How do you get to that point of that information, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So he smacks her in the head with the other stick. He then proceeds to rape her, vaginally and anally. He raped her, and then he felt so guilty about that, he covered her up. So he covered her up with blankets. That's why we couldn't find her right away. So the investigation continued. So Grandma's strangled, so was the little girl. That's the cause of death.
Are you a father at this time?
In fact, my son was a classmate of Danielle at the Roosevelt School. Yeah, I am. And so we really needed to catch this guy. And there was every effort, I'll tell you. From there, the investigation, they did all the evidence. They did all. Now, DNA is that there isn't. It's just starting. I mean, they're just talking about DNA now. So they're not really doing anything. The crime lab comes out, collects all the evidence. That they did it professionally. They did like CSI. They came out. They did their own thing. From there, it just was a matter of interviewing people and doing all that kind of thing. A lot of people were interviewed. We interviewed all the residents, and nobody heard anything. One guy whose room was adjacent to the bedroom where the little girl was thought he heard a cat meowing. And it probably was her. We don't know. That we're not sure with, because we do know that because he had tied her up, that she was alive when he raped her. So, yeah. And then he untied her, and she had died by then. So,
at what point does this thing for the department go cold, and we're at a stalemate of sorts?
It's hard to say it went cold because every investigator was in on it, but by the time Jackie got it, which was probably a couple years after that, we stayed on it for a long time. Back then we didn't have the computer system, any of the stuff that you guys have now, technology you have now. And I remember Jim Rice sending fingerprints off to different agencies by mail. We had one fingerprint, and we were trying to nail it down.
Where'd you get the fingerprint from?
From a door jamb, and they had and Aaron Rash was the head of the crime unit or crime lab, and he had cut that. They cut it out like they did, taped it, and we just could not find the owner of that fingerprint, which was kind of interesting.
Yeah, was it on an interior door?
Interior, yep, and it would have been possibly the suspects because of the location of the jam door on the jam. So, now I need to tell you that when all the evidence nothing was brought to the crime scene by the suspect. This was all things that were inside the apartment, inside that office area, like the vacuum cleaner cord that he used to tie Grandma up with, and the sticks, of course. All these things were all within, and that's important, especially when I get to the profile part. So. So the case, they're still doing, tracking down suspects and all that kind of thing, and the cabinet that all this information is being stored in is about a 4-foot by or 3 foot high by 4 foot wide, 2 drawer, and metal cabinet that's in the detective's office. And so, of course, there's other things happening. And so, as it goes along, like I say, about 2 years later, it becomes not so much a priority anymore. But whenever an investigator was assigned to the detectives division, they were assigned that case. And they were given a chance, fresh eyes are given a chance to look.
For sure.
Yeah.
Which is a huge thing, yeah.
And Jackie went one step further. She contacted the FBI, and at that time, a brand new unit called the profiling unit. And it was really new. Profiling unit was at the FBI. And so she asked for a profile. And John Douglas himself did the profiling.
D. John Douglas.
D. John Douglas, yeah. So he did the profile. And she read it, or I don't know what, at that time, unlike the other podcasts, it wasn't that we were not for, we didn't want new techniques, and this was certainly new to us. It was a profile of a suspect. I think it was just we didn't know how to read it. They didn't know how to read it.
Because your take, you said on that other pod, there were some things that weren't completely, you felt accurate about it.
Yeah.
What were a couple of those?
Of that podcast?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, some of it is minor. It's like that we didn't want to read the profile and use that. Mm-hmm. It wasn't that at all, and that's how it came out on that other podcast. Mm-hmm. And
that's big, yeah.
Yeah, and it's not that we didn't want it. I just think they didn't know how. Now, so the profile was done, more suspects, and were interviewed. They traveled all over, and Jackie did a lot of work on it. After that, I think my brother Arnie even looked at it, and for a while was looking at it. But
is he a DPD employee at that time?
Yeah, he's with the Dickinson Police Department, and he's an investigator. He did a lot of juvenile things, but I'm sure he looked at this thing too, because every new investigator got it. So Chief Bazzano rides into town as the new chief and gets a hold of me and says, "Okay, you're in investigations. I want," and he said, "I want you to kind of prioritize this. Not do your other things, but I want you to prioritize this, and I want you to look at it." And I said, "Okay." So I get this drawer, this cabinet, this metal cabinet. I can barely open it because the paperwork's falling out. I mean, it is just chock full of all kinds of things.
Are you guys at this time still downtown, or have you relocated?
No, we're at the LEC now.
Okay.
We're at the LEC, and so I start tearing it apart. I inherited 90-some suspects that they had named. I mean, they had sheets of paper listed as some serial killers. Some silly, and in Texas and all over. So I thought, I'm going to start from ground zero. I read through the case, I read all the things, and I come across the profile. And I look at the profile, and I'll never forget this. Now, this is just a few months into it. I'm sitting at my kitchen table and at home, and I got this thing all sprawled out. And I look at the profile, and I jump up and I said, "I know who did it. I know who did this." And my wife at the time just looked at me and went, "What the heck?" And I said, "I know who did this. Now we got to find him." And the profile fit my guy really well. And so what I did is I did some more investigation into him while he lived here. And things like, I talked to his ex-wife. Actually, she wasn't an ex-wife. She was his current wife. He had a wife and 2 kids with her, and he had an ex-wife with 2 other kids. So this one particularly had 2 daughters. And I went to speak to her, and I asked her a couple of things. I said, after that happened, did Bill change his looks at all? And she said, yeah, because on the profile, it said that he would change his looks. I said, did he change his look? And she said, well, he had pitch black hair. Once this happened, his hair turned completely white. And I thought, wow. I said, how long did he stick around? She thought maybe a month after it happened. That was part of the profile.
What about so what gets me interested when you say that about what hit you, when can you remember what you read that sparked it? What piece of information sparked it for you?
It wasn't one piece. It was several. It was several. And the whole profile, and I don't know why I could read it and say, okay, I can put a face to this thing, but I could, gift, whatever,
Yeah.
But I was able to say, this is the guy right here.
Okay.
So now we got to track him down. Sandy Greff, who was in charge of, at that time, she was forever with the police department, but she was in charge of records. I told her I would like to find him, and so we used, she went on and used the FBI again, NCIC. Every time they made a stop and ran an NCIC, excuse me, they recorded, the FBI recorded it. Well, we found out that a trooper down in Arkansas stopped him and ran an NCIC. And so that's how we found him. And Jerry Thyssen, BCI, contacted those guys. And we traveled down there because they said he was down there. And he was kind of wanted for a homicide down there as well in Batesville, Arkansas.
So from the time, what's the timeline from you get this in front of you or you're asked of this, to do this, working through that information? What kind of timeline are we talking about?
I would say about 6 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did it pretty much consume you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I went to, yes, yeah. There were a lot of sleepless nights where I would just dwell in my brain and just go, okay, can I, is this the guy? Is this not the guy? I really just, like I said, I started from ground zero and went, okay, it's hard to comprehend that somebody close to you could actually do this. And it was hard for me. And once I got over that, then it was easier. It got easier because I think that's what was the roadblock was the fact that, how could somebody that's close do this to this little girl, But I got over that real quick. Now, later I learned that, he not only babysat for her, but he would give her baths and things like that. So this guy was so close to the family. And so about 6 months, and Sandy, I'll never forget Sandy, when she found him or found about where he was, she comes running into my office and says, I got him. I went, okay. So we went on from there. We drove down to, Jerry Thyssen and I drove down to Arkansas. And on the way down, we're talking strategic, what are we going to do? And I said, and I remember telling him, I'm not leaving until I find out one way or the other if he did it, because I really think he did it. Well, Jerry was involved with it for a while, but I had taken it over. So he said, well, you do what you got to do.
What year are we now?
1991? I think it's 1991.
Sure.
Dates.
Yeah, close.
Yeah. And so we traveled down there, and the first day that we went down there, they were going to pick him up on a warrant, believe it or not, for having a wife, having two wives.
Sure.
Because he was married down there as well.
Surprisingly, not an unheard of thing.
Yeah, no kidding. So, but he was in a different town, and we didn't have him the first day. The second day, they picked him up from his home, brought him to the sheriff's office, told me he was under arrest, and here's a little dinky sheriff's office in this little town, and that's where we interviewed him, was actually in the sheriff's office, right next to the jail. Jail and the sheriff's office had a steel door between it. That's it.
Wait, what's the population of this place where he's living?
It's like maybe 2,000. This is in hillbilly country.
Sure. So you roll in and you effect an arrest on the guy immediately, or how does that work?
They effected an arrest on having the wives, and being a suspect. That night, we were able, with those local investigators, talk about his method and things. So he was a suspect in that homicide down there.
What, do you remember the details?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because I'll get to that. Yeah, I remember the details. There was a grandmother, another elderly lady. She was in her home. She was strangled. She was sitting there, and he broke in, strangled her, didn't rape her, but strangled her to death, put her in the trunk of a car, drove the vehicle to a bridge where there was a dry creek, then dumped her body off there, then took and parked the car in a bar, a gay bar, parking lot of a gay bar, and that's where it was found. So, and during their investigation, they found out that he drove by there every day. He drove by that house every day, going to work and going home. So twice a day, actually, he drove by that house. When I interviewed him on that, he said, well, I stopped in one time to talk to her, and I ran out of gas, so I needed to use her phone. Oh. So anyhow, we get into the sheriff's office, and as we're walking into the door, we're in the lobby now. Jerry Thyssen says to me, "You're the lead interviewer," and I said, "Oh, okay, here we go." And I said, "In this interview, in order for me to be really effective and do the things I can do, I need you just to sit there. I just need you to sit there and let me do my thing." So I said, "But I'll turn to you every now and then, if I get stumped." Prior to this, I again contacted the FBI profiling unit. John Douglas is no longer there. I mean, he's there, but he's not handling this case. An agent by the name of Judd Ray was, and I talked to him for quite a while prior to going down there. I said, "How am I going to get this guy to confess?" And he said, "Take your time. It may take up to 4 days to do this." Wow. And I went, wow, I don't know if I can interview anybody for 4 days. But I said, all right. And he said, always work the angle of the little girl. He feels really guilty about the little girl. Work that angle, work that angle. I said, okay.
You know what's funny? I'll interject. Before you think 4 days, and now as the courts have ruled, when we start pressing on that 2 to 4 hour mark, they're going to come hard. A defense attorney is going to use whatever he can, and there's been some over the course of my career that have went, 6, up at all, you're there all day and such. But, to fathom back then, and advice would be like, hey, you might be here 4 days with this guy and go on. That's times change, whatever, but that's pretty neat. What about this guy? How from Dickinson down to Arkansas? Why? What was the connection there? I mean, is he trying to hide out in this podunk town, I guess, if I'll call it that, or is he?
Yeah, this is where he moved from Dickinson to Michigan. Over in Michigan, he had a boyfriend, and he lived with him for a while, and they must have broke up, and then down to Arkansas he went. Now, during the course of his life, he was a mechanic. He worked for the city of Dickinson at the time of the homicide. Oh, wow. Yeah. He was a truck driver, over-the-road truck driver, and carnival worker. So he was, he did a lot of different things during his lifetime, and he traveled about. And that was part of the profile, is that he would, he'd try and hide out wherever. So he kind of felt comfortable down there. He had been down there for a while in Arkansas.
Okay.
Anyway, so from there, we walk in to interview him. I sit directly in front of him. Jerry sits off to the side of him, and I start in, and I said, "Do you remember me?" And he said, "Yep. Yeah, I don't remember your name, but I know you're from Dickinson. You're a cop." I said, "Yep." And I said, "You know what we're here for?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Well, we're here to finally take care of business when it comes to the Swanson Motel." "I don't know what you're talking about." And I said, "Well, I need to read your rights." And I read him his rights. And I said, you really want to talk to us about this? Because he, well, sure, I'll help out any way I can. So I started talking to him. And what I did, which hadn't been done before, and that the FBI, when I told the FBI, that's why they took a lot of interest in it, I used the profile. I used the 2 pieces of paper, and it was a one page and a half that John Douglas did. And I started reading off everything. I said, well, we got the FBI involved, and here's what they said. This is what you did, and this is who you are. I went through the whole profile. I had highlighted some of the areas I knew would get him, and I highlighted them, and I'd even show it to him. I said, see, this is what the FBI said. So we know you did it. And so, we just want to hear your side of the story before we close this out. And he said, okay. He looks at me, he said, you want me to say I did it? And he holds up his hands like this. He says, I did it. Now, most cops would say, no, I don't want you to tell me what I want to hear. I want you to tell me the truth, or something to that effect. But when he held up his hands like that, I knew through, experience and training, he was giving up. So I said, thank you. Does that not make you feel better? And he went, not yet. I said, well, it will as we go along. And so we got on, this is all recorded. And so we got on tape his version and everything. Now, this man remembered exactly what the little girl was wearing, exactly what Grandma was wearing. He remembered every detail, things that nobody else would have known. And this is 10 years later. And, and so he confessed, and there was no doubt, because of things he remembered. When it came to the part of the sexual assault on the little girl, he would just say, I did things I wish I had never done to her. And this is when Jerry Thyssen would break in and say, well, I need to hear exactly what you did. And he'd look at him and say, I did stuff. Well, what did you do exactly? And he came out and he finally said, I raped a little girl. And I went, okay, so we got it all on tape and we finished it off. And when I was getting up to go out, he said, I want to thank you, Bubba. He called me Bubba. And he said, take boss with you. Because Jerry had pressed him so hard, he called him boss. And so anyway.
That's psychological warfare, there's a lot of different names to it,
sure.
As well. And stuff. But the confession, the art of the confession being like, I did it, that's breadcrumbs, is obviously, I know as it goes along here, those fine details that you referred to there, that's what you really want.
That's right.
On the good confessions.
And you want to ask open questions. You don't, and there's a reason I'm saying that. You just ask open and let them talk to you. You don't lead them into anything. And this one, I was particularly, I'll be honest, I was proud of this interview. It went so well, and it was just the right time and the right things that were being said. It took me an hour and a half, and we were done.
Yeah.
1 hour and a half.
That's graceful.
Yep. So then we go out and, we go to lunch. Jerry and I go to lunch because now the other team is going to go in and get him. And I told him, I said, just walk him through it. I mean, just be very patient. We got our confession. And I was so glad they let us go first. The Arkansas officers went in there and they got somewhat of a confession. And then he stopped talking to them. And he said, I want the Nodak boys back in here. And we went, what? Okay, so so we went back in. They asked us to go back in and do it. As I started interviewing him, it was a whole different flavor. There was a different air about it. He would always say, well, they said I did this. They said I did that. They said, and I went, I don't get this. So right during the interview, it surprised Jerry. It surprised Jerry. I just got up and walked out because I wanted to ask him, what did you tell him? What did you do? Later, we learned how they questioned him was, if you were to use a garden tool to break in through the window or cut the screen, what would you use? Well, Bill, a hole? A hole? No, not a hole. What would you use? A garden. And he goes, a shears? Yeah, a shears. They wrote it down. Yeah. And so they led him through his confession. And that's what caused them the biggest problem. And that's why they didn't keep him. Because they knew, the state's attorneys between the two states and everything knew we had a solid case. And so we wanted one solid case, and then we'd move on. Then we can move on. Well, right after this all happened, and the Arkansas guys let it out that we got a probable serial killer here. Everybody in the nation was calling us, calling them particularly, but calling me too. And so they all wanted at it. And so I called Judd Ray from the profiling unit. I said, I don't think I'm ever going to get him back here. Everybody wants him. And so Judd said, well, I'll put an end to that. He said, we want one conviction, and then we'll walk up and we will walk him through all this stuff. And so that's what the plan was, get a conviction, let the profile unit come up and interview him. And Texas wanted him for several, Kansas. Those are just some of the states I remember.
Talking about the process, when you're talking about interviewing some people, they probably don't give it the credit it should be given if they've never done it before in the room as such as you're talking. But you and I both, and I've had some bad ones in my own career that I really regret on, but the good ones, when you think about your preparation and your time through, what was that, you talk a little bit about how much of that consumed you?
Oh yeah. 'Cause you gotta always, for me, interviewing was kind of a natural thing. It was a gift. Right. Again, that's what I'm saying.
That's what the legends say.
Yeah, that's what the legends say. Anyway, it was, the state's attorney said I could get a confession out of a rock. And I went, no, not really. But it's a lot of mental preparation. And when I walked into that room as an interviewer, you were mine. I owned you. And that's how I walked in the room. Now, I wouldn't portray that, but in my head, I owned you. And that takes a while to get used to, and interviewing, as you do it, it becomes more and more natural, and you get better at it. You get really good at it, and it just takes some confidence, and it takes you being able to read the suspect, and get around them. That's what you're doing.
You have to know people.
You have to know people, yeah, and you're asking them to confess to a crime and go to jail. Right. That's not an easy sell. So I think a good car salesman could do it, but who knows? But
how did the criminal justice process play out after that?
Well, they wanted to keep him down there for a while, and there was some bantering back and forth. What really helped our case to get him back here is the state's attorney down there that was prosecuting Bill during this, getting ready. They weren't even getting ready for trial. They were just doing motions and that thing at that time. He called the defense attorney's family. Well, the defense attorney wasn't there. He called him up and said, how could your husband do this? How could he ever defend somebody like this? And just bantered them. And so they got a restraining order on it just got to be a circus. Got a restraining order on the state's attorney, and the judge was, beside himself going, what the heck here? And so that helped us to get him down here, or get him up here. And so extradition, papers were signed, and he traveled up. He got escorted up here.
Yeah. And what about with the family? At this juncture with the family and communication with the family, what's their take on this, reaction to this?
The reaction was, on the family pretty much was somewhat disbelief. And even years later, I had to meet with family members to go over the case. They wanted to meet with, they traveled from like Minnesota and Grand Forks area. And I met with them and showed them the entire case because they wanted to know for sure. After that, I think they were pretty satisfied because as Owen Mayer, the state's attorney, said, there was no doubt he did it. Now, the problem they tried to get the confession thrown out. They couldn't do that. They tried to get the trial moved out of Dickinson and couldn't do that. The judge was it was getting set for trial. And the defense attorney was, he tried everything. He was doing a good job. He was court appointed, and he was really active, and he tried every motion he could, and pretty much, he had to, because he knew he didn't have anything. With that confession and with the things that Bill said during that confession, if once that got admitted, it was toast. It was over. I should go back. Now, when I went in there, just for a second, I'm going to regress. When I went in there, now prior to this, I want you to know we had absolutely any physical evidence against him. I had gone to the state lab and got all the evidence that they had still on file.
How about this? How about that fingerprint?
I got that fingerprint, but it didn't match his. Yeah. So I went there and I received the clothing and all that thing, and I said, okay, how can we, get DNA out of here? I know you have DNA, how can we get some DNA? And he said, well, all the evidence on DNA, a freezer broke down and destroyed all the evidence that way. Oh. So we had nothing to go on. So I knew this was a one-shot deal. So that added some pressure.
Oh, for sure.
Okay, so anyhow, we get to the point where we're going to go to trial, and the defense attorney is going to talk with him one time, and we got a week to go to trial, I believe it was. I get a call in the middle of the night, said, you need to come down here, but you can't go up in the jail. Just come down here. So I went down and I went, what's going on? Here, Bill had passed away in his jail cell on the bed 1 week prior to trial. So that's always left some doubt, in people's mind. But if you ever just listen to the case and listen to that tape and all that, you just know 100% that was the right guy, that we had the right suspect.
And so his legal name was?
William Rieger.
William Rieger.
He went by Bill.
Did he have priors to the incident at Swanson?
I don't recall. Okay. I don't recall. If he did, they were minor. They were minor charges. There was nothing major.
Here's some perspective for you when you think about no physical evidence and working with information at that time and using what you had. Like now, if we were to send out our team of investigators to process that scene, I mean, some of the things at hand between our reverse cell phone tower stuff to triangulate who's there. We have a geofence capability now where essentially we would pinpoint coordinates around that and find out who was all there at that said time that we believed it occurred. And then you pair that up with some DNA and some of those advances, right? That, I mean, some of them you're familiar with even during the course of your career.
Yes.
That change the game in that way. It's, I don't know, has that been something you think about that? I mean, what are your thoughts when you hear some of that stuff?
If we would have had half the technology you guys have today, that thing would have been solved probably that day, Yeah. But yeah, we just didn't have anything to work with. The biggest thing that as a department we overcame was the lack of training. From then on, I believe there was such a focus on training and such a demand for it. Because we were caught flat-footed, and as an investigator, and I had this under my belt. Of course, I was able to attend the FBI Academy, which I learned so much more there. I attended a week-long homicide school, and this was put on by a retired lieutenant out of the Bronx in New York, and he handled over 1,000 homicides. And the one thing he did that I'll never forget is he said, I'm here to not only teach you some techniques, but I'm here to make sure that when you see that body, you see it as evidence and not freak out and see it as a person. This is evidence. And so he said, I'm going to expose you to the worst of the worst that I had to deal with. Wow. I'm telling you, what humans can do to other humans is right. Unbelievable. Yeah. Unbelievable.
Yeah, an unfortunate part that, in the room here, that's the side of it that many of the folks that we deal with don't get to see, and I'm glad they don't get to see
yes.
that stuff and pay us to do that. But man, Chief, you got any thoughts on any of that?
That was just intriguing listening to that coming from your mouth, Chief. That was we read about it until you actually hear it from somebody that worked that case. It definitely tells a story. Thank you for sharing that information with us. What are some other cases that you don't have to get into detail that kind of jump out and pop into your mind as far as with your career that kind of stick out?
Oh boy, there were for a while there in the early '90s, I was really kept busy. We had the Cindy Owens murder where Jada Christopher killed her, shot her with a .44 Magnum out east of town, and we were able to get her. And there's another confession that, I had to go in and get. Here she is. She just, and this was a wild gal, and she did not even hesitate to shoot her. She even threatened to run over Cindy, and she confessed to everything. So that was one. Jada Christopher, she went to jail for life, and I think she just passed away not too long ago. But that's one. The Paragon robbery. That's where I got to profile my own suspects, and in less than a week we had them, and that was kind of an interesting case. These two guys go in and they rob the Paragon in early morning, and I was able to get a confession out of those guys too as well. So that's one couple of them there. Then of course there's the guy that put the hit out on me, and we were able to keep that under wrap. I mean, we were able to get him before he got me, so that was kind of good.
Who was the person in that where the arrest was made on?
Oh, Rambosic, Ray Rambosic. Yeah. He had, this is where I think really God watches over all of us. But he really, he happened to put out his hand. Ray put out his hand to an informant of mine. He actually went to my house. He and this informant, they were going to beat my wife up at that time, and just proved to me, because I had charged Ray in another crime, and he thought that was just wrong. And so he was going to get even with me by beating up my wife. And my informant talked him out of it. They went up to my door, and my informant said, "I don't want any part of this." The next morning he called me and said, he wants to put a hit on you. And he said he wants me to arrange for that. And the informant said, "Okay, I'm in on, I want to help you." And so he introduced two BCI agents to Ray, and Ray signed over his Cadillac and everything else. So, we were able to. But that was for me. That was a real eye opener that could happen to me, even.
Sure. And this is all timeline mid '90s, early '90s.
Yeah. It was a busy time for me during that time, I'll tell you. So those are some of the other ones, Chief, that stick out.
I think at the time you had retired, and help me out on this, Chief Dossinger. You were sitting maybe at 26 or 7 sworn?
Departmental wise, like when you retired, do you remember staffing probably about 24, 25 sworn?
I was going to say 24, 25.
24, 25. Now we're sitting at about 44, going to 48 sworn. You're soon, and roughly 70s overall employees. So obviously, the department's grown a lot.
Yes.
Over the years, just kind of looking back, you retired in 2011.
Yes.
And looking back in what are some things you miss being in that profession right now, retired?
Oh, first and foremost, the people. I mean, cops are just, it's a family. Back then, I would hope that that's what I promoted as well, because that's how I felt. But this was a family, and we had to all work together and get along, as much as, and part of that was, we fought it like family, but we were there for each other, and I appreciate that. I'm sure that still goes on today, even as the department gets bigger.
Certainly, and being a police officer, it's more than just going to work every day. It's more than just a job. It's it's more than just profession, because you spend a lot of time with the men and the women that you work with every day, and the job that you have to do, and you have to rely on them so much and trust them, and you really they become part of your family. Yep. And I still remember numerous people that were on my shifts over the years, and you still talk to them, and it's much more than a job.
Yeah, it's much more than just a job. It's a way of life. It consumes you, actually, and it's a profession that I'll tell you what, I would do it over again every time.
I think it's best probably when it's all said and done to reflect on the fond memories as we grow into life. And I know you've shared a lot of your retirement with me over the years and how awesome things have been and such. So that leads me to ask you, so what don't you miss about it? Like the day you left and it was, you're like, I am glad that I no longer have this, or because I think I look at all of us here, and I know you've shelf lives, and this job is only for certain amounts of time. And you even told me that 20-year caps on things, and mandatory retirements and stuff like that, because of what it does and takes a toll over time. And for people that don't know, Chuck, I mean, your chest has been popped open twice.
Just once.
Just once, but a heart attack, and,
Yep.
and then, but you had to go back in.
Well, they were going to go back in, but because I had a triple bypass.
Yeah.
And as 6 months after the triple bypass, 2 of them collapsed. Yeah. So they were going to go back in, but they decided medication would be able to handle it as well. So I still have 2 collapsed arteries, but I'm doing pretty good with the medication.
Yeah, and I know, family and genetics for a lot of this stuff that people deal with, and yourself, there's some of that. But there's some other things that are there. And so, I mean, I just go back to like things you look back on that, you're in a retirement and but maybe that you're glad that you don't have to deal with on a day-to-day.
Well, yeah, absolutely. It took me quite a while to get back to normal, kind of, like I say. You look at people as a police officer, you look at people differently, and you start to not trust anybody. And so you start to go, where's any good people anymore? And it kind of makes you look through not rose-colored glasses, but glasses that are a little not true. Now, what I don't miss is I really loved investigations. I really loved it. The chief's job, sorry, chief, but the chief's job is less being a police officer and more about not only management. You have to manage the department, but a politician as well. And although I could fit into that, I don't miss that at all. Because you have to sell the department not only to the public, and make sure that they understand why you need the extra money, but you have to also do the commission, and make sure they understand where you're coming from and what your goals are and how can we work together as a team. Fortunately for me, I was able to, with the commission, get on that same page, and with the city manager, Greg Sund, we had that understanding that I don't want this department to lack things. And so they were really helpful. They understood, but it took me time to explain to them where I was going and what I needed. And that's not easy sometimes.
Yeah. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there. As you're in police administration or chief, as your career goes on, you feel less and less like a police officer, yes, more like a politician. I think one of the challenging things of being a police chief of any agency is trying to stay ahead of the game and predict what's going to be needed of your department for the community. And I think that was one of the things that was really tough with the rapid growth of the oil activity in our community. Was we had to do a lot of catch up in a short amount of time.
Yep.
And even now, as far as how our community is constantly changing as far as what the needs of the police department are. And really, you got to predict now what you really need about 2 to 3 years down the road.
Yep.
I mean, especially for staffing, it takes a while before you hire somebody and they're really considered an asset for your department. There's about a 2 to 3 year gap there with that and equipment, vehicles, technology. So you always constantly got to stay ahead.
Yep.
And after times it becomes a chess game. And you really have to plant that seed. So when you really need what you need, the commission's already aware of the problem.
That's right.
And that you're going to be coming in a future meeting asking for requests. And you really need a good working relationship with your city administrator and your commission. And, I've been a chief since 2011, since you've been retired. And I've been very fortunate. I've had an excellent city commission to work over the years and city administrators. And they really worked well with public safety and especially the police department. I've been very fortunate with that. And one thing when you left, you left a very strong foundation for the police department in this city, and you've been a strong mentor for me over the years, and I'll never forget that, Chief.
Thank you.
That you've taught me a lot, and you really left this department in a strong foundation to build on, because we really needed it. Soon after you left, we dealt with the oil activity.
Yep.
And sometimes I wondered, what am I doing stepping into this role? And I said,
I
boy,
bet.
Chuck left at a good time.
Yeah, I've told myself that many times. I left at a good time.
But I was very fortunate. You had some very good people in the department, yes, that grew with me and helped me out over the years. And that's one thing I'm very proud of. I'm very proud of this department, but I could not have done it without the men and women of this police department and the current people that we have working for us right now.
I have to admit, I am very proud of you guys too. I really am. I still am. You have come a long way in a very short period of time, and done it in style, and professionally. This department's the top. It's the top department, I feel.
Yeah, and the old adage that good things come to good people, and I look back at your career and talking about the stress and some of that stuff that you don't miss that much, but I think that pairs up with the person you are, obviously, Chuck, and a great guy, and everybody in here feels that you genuinely cared, when you were at the helm here for us, and looked at you in that manner that good days, bad days, we all have it, but you cared, and when you think back on it, Cripes, I don't think there's probably much more than matters after the fact than being able to say that. So
it's a great motivator. I did care. I cared about the people. And I'm glad it showed. I really am. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and I look at, we've talked the last couple episodes about our new recruits and the asset of getting locals, and everybody in here. You got Lieutenant Handel, Chief Dossinger, locals, yourself, local. Yep. I say quasi local for me. I'm an hour and a half down the road. I get Southeast Montana, but we get a lot of Baker people over here. But as much of an asset as that is for the community, that there's a big toll for those being local too, because there's these intimate relationships and these expectations that exist that may not exist for those that can come in from outside. And so, can you talk about that at all?
Oh yeah, that was the hardest part for me. I mean, I grew up, they knew me, I knew them, they knew I wasn't always on the right side of the law, probably, but never got caught. No, that's but dealing with people, I had an advantage sometimes because they knew me and I knew them, and so I could at least communicate this. I think the biggest obstacle for me when I first started was the fact that they had to accept me in a place of authority now, and I hadn't done that, and I couldn't push it on them. That is the one thing I was so aware of. And so a lot of people, and I tell the story a lot, is I could not write a traffic ticket to a person that came up, or I came up to their car, I stopped them, came up to the car, and they say, "Hi, Chuck, how you doing today?" Dang, I can't write a ticket. I got to write I got to write a warning, or hey, just slow down or whatever. So I did that a lot. I did that a lot. And I got, of course, sometimes tickets need to be written, and so there's that balance. And I throughout my career, the balance, especially in uniform, I had to work on that because, like I said, I was pretty easy. I would, at that time, I could be. It was a different time too. You can't do that so much anymore. So for locals, it might be even a little tougher to be on the department now. I had a lot more discretion, be able to use my discretion whether or not I wrote a ticket or not. But nowadays, that's kind of taken away from the officers.
Yeah. Well, do you have any, as a last open-ended question here, parting statements? You're back in the house here.
Okay.
You've been away for a while. You're back here. You're seeing kind of how things are changing. Chief Dossinger's taken us to some good places here as an organization and stuff. And parting words? Yeah.
I just want to again express how proud I am of this department, and I am just so glad to see where it's going. It's thinking ahead. You're in line. You're stepping in line, and all that. The advice for the young guys, the young people coming into this field or this profession is that one thing I regret, and I was told when I was first started, was write down, keep track of all the things that you do throughout your career. And I wish I would have done that, because you would be amazed. I have a couple of scrapbooks, and I looked through it just the other day, getting ready for this kind of, and I went, man, I don't remember doing that. I don't remember doing that. And it was good things. It was good things. And it's the little things that we maybe just not even, take for granted. For instance, like when the gentleman got back in touch with somebody, we, as a young boy, he had fallen into the river, and Officer Jack Stanton, Rick Bartz, and I responded to the call and rescued that kid, who turned out to be a doctor and everything else, and he reached out to me, and So I did talk with him. He said, I just wanted to thank you. He said, it's 30, 40 years in the making. I wish I would have done it sooner. But he said, I want you to know I made something of myself. Wow. And I remember that incident after he explained it, because I went, what incident was that? And these are the things the young guys, if they would keep track, they would look back and be proud of what they did.
Any other career advice for former chief of police and for young guys coming in? Part of the
one thing also, don't let this career take you over, which it can. Remember that family comes first, and you come first, actually. Keep that in perspective. It's so easy for this job and all the needs that go with it overwhelm you, and you forget what's really important is your family base. And over the years, I can say there's times I've forgotten.
Sure.
And I look back and I regret that, things that I missed with the kids and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's the only other advice I have.
Yeah.
I think that's really good advice. I think that's one thing that we really try to do within this department is that, time goes fast. Your kids grow up fast, the sporting events, the school activities. And I think we really try to work to make sure that our officers and our staff members can attend as many of those functions as possible, because family does come first.
Amen. Good job.
And we try to be really not only a family-orientated department in that ways, but I think one thing that you really started with this department before I took over was really the community aspect, community involvement, and probably you were probably ahead of the forefront before the buzzword of community policing really started. And I think you started that. Obviously, we do it in different ways,
right?
But your legacy lives on with this department with that community aspect.
Thank you.
I think it always starts at the top. And when I started underneath you and you hired me, I look at the different levels of leadership we had at that time, and I agree with Chief on this, that element of the importance of community. I would hear it from you all the time, and oftentimes more than mid-level and others that were working here. So you always knew, it's like, okay, well, I know what was being said, by the man, you at that time. And it helped direct me, I know as a young officer, because I would hear different things and different, attitudes on it. But I was like, okay, but I know what he said. So, and it was always community.
Thank you. Yeah.
So.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. 34 years of service, National Academy graduate class.
167.
Yeah. Lone Eagle Award winner.
Yeah.
The list kind of would go on and on and on from there over the course of your career. And so for our listeners, I just want them to, Mikey's going to tee this up, so you're going to know what it's all about right away, but share this, get it out there. You hear Speedcuffing right there in the background. That's what's coming.
Something.
Yeah. This is courtesy of Lieutenant Hanel.
Oh.
All right. A little fun thing we do at the very end to wrap everything and tie it together with some fun. Okay. And so essentially it's just going to be 30 seconds, and Lieutenant Mike's going to put you on the clock, and we'll get through as many of these as possible. If something doesn't come to mind as I ask you, you just pass on it and we'll get to the next one. But
I didn't get to study for this.
Yeah. So I think we went pretty soft on you on this one here.
All right.
So we kept that in mind here. So do you feel good about this?
Oh, yeah.
All right, let's do this. Deadwood or Vegas?
Deadwood.
Interview or interrogation?
Interview.
PR-24 or pepper spray?
PR-24.
Harley or Honda?
Harley Davidson.
Side-by-side drive or a trail hike?
Side-by-side drive.
What you miss most about being a police officer?
The people.
And what you miss least? Probably saved you on that one.
Yeah, you did.
On the recording. So
thanks, Mike.
Yeah, that's good stuff. And so, Chief, any parting words from you?
No, thank you, Chief, for coming. And you know that the coffee mug is always sitting here waiting for you. Don't be a stranger.
Thank you
very much so, and appreciate you coming over.
Yeah,
beautiful time of year over in South Dakota. But thank you again for coming over.
Thank you.
Okay, all of our listeners out there, you make sure to be paying attention and sharing this stuff. You know that you can get the subscription to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon Music. Make sure to like the YouTube channel that Lieutenant Hanel keeps up on us, our Facebook page. Subscribe, share, get us out there. We want to share the message Dickinson in the region. So thanks everybody for coming, and this was awesome. So
Thank you.
Be safe,
Thank you
everyone.
for having me.